Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something I know we've all struggled with, the actual biological reasons behind why we overeat. And right off the bat, we're taking the blame completely off your willpower. Seriously, toss that guilt out the window. Instead, we're going to shine a huge spotlight on the chemical makeup of our modern diets. If you have ever felt bad about your eating habits, you're going to want to stick around for the science we're unpacking today. So, let's get into it.
Okay, we've all been there, right? You completely polish off a family-sized bag of chips, or maybe a whole sleeve of cookies, and you feel entirely stuffed. You literally couldn't eat another bite. But then, it's like magic. An hour later, your stomach starts rumbling again. It's insanely frustrating, and what do? We immediately question our own discipline. We think, why couldn't I just stop? Why on earth am I hungry again?
Well, the secret lies in the number 508. Like I said, this is absolutely not a willpower issue. There was this groundbreaking trial run by a researcher named Kevin D. Hall at the National Institutes of Health, and it illustrates this perfectly. When the participants in his study were put on a diet entirely made of ultra-processed foods, they spontaneously ate exactly 508 extra calories every single day. The crazy part? Nobody asked them to eat more. Their biology literally demanded it. And as we know, an extra 500 calories a day adds up incredibly fast over time. To really put this to the test, the NIH researchers took 20 healthy adults and gave them 2 different diets for 14 days each. One was ultra-processed, the other completely unprocessed. Now here's the absolute kicker. Both diets were perfectly matched. Same total calories presented, same fat, same sugar, sodium, and fiber, the whole shebang. Yet, the ultra-processed group gained 2 pounds in just 2 weeks. Plus, they were practically inhaling their food at a rate of 17 calories per minute. Meanwhile, when those exact same people ate the unprocessed diet, they actually lost 2 pounds and naturally ate way slower. The physical structure of the ultra-processed food had completely hijacked their behavior, basically bypassing their body's natural stop signs. So to figure out how our food pulls off this biological hijacking, we're going to break things down into 5 key areas. 1, the hunger trap. 2, the science of satiety. 3, protein leverage. 4, dietary energy density. And finally, 5, mastering intuitive eating.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the hunger trap. To really understand this trap, we have to look at the NOVA food classification system. NOVA groups what we eat by how processed it is, starting at group 1, which is your normal unprocessed whole foods, all the way down to group 4. Group 4 is where we find ultra-processed foods, or UPFs. These aren't just cooked foods. They're industrial formulations. They use ingredients you'd practically never find in a home kitchen, things like emulsifiers, isolated proteins, and extracted oils. They are scientifically engineered to confuse your body's fullness signals. And a quick warning here, because this is a massive misconception, plant-based does not automatically mean healthy. A highly processed plant-based burger or a vegan protein bar loaded with industrial additives, yeah, that falls straight into the group 4 trap. It drives overeating just as aggressively as any other junk food.
Moving right along to part 2, the science of satiety. First, we really need to define what satiety actually is. Satiety is the length of time it takes for hunger to come back after you finish eating. Now, this is distinctly different from satiation. Satiation is simply that feeling of physical fullness that makes you drop your fork and end a meal. For example, eating a big, crisp apple might keep you feeling full and satisfied all afternoon. That is high satiety. But remember that bag of chips we talked about? Sure, it might cause satiation in the moment, so you stop eating, but its actual satiety value is rock bottom, it wears off in an hour, and boom, you're back in the pantry.
Way back in 1995, an Australian researcher named Susanna Holt actually developed the satiety index to measure this exact phenomenon. She fed volunteers different foods, all containing the exact same amount of calories, and tracked their fullness for 2 hours. She set regular white bread as the baseline score of 100, and wow, the extremes she found are wild. A croissant scored a measly 47, but steamed potatoes, they clocked in at an incredible 323. Think about that. For the exact same number of calories, a simple steamed potato keeps you more than 3 times fuller than bread and nearly 7 times fuller than a croissant. The secret to keeping hunger at bay isn't just mindlessly counting calories. It's entirely about the nutritional makeup of what you're chewing on. Which brings us to part 3, protein leverage. Now, this is a seriously fascinating story. Researchers David Robbenheimer and Stephen Simpson were studying appetite, but they weren't studying humans. They were studying locusts. And they noticed something crazy. These insects would ruthlessly prioritize eating until they hit a very specific protein quota. If the researchers gave them food that was super low in protein, the locust wouldn't just eat a normal portion and call it a day. No way. They would gorge themselves, overconsuming everything else, purely to hit that exact protein target. It turns out this is a primitive survival mechanism that takes priority over basically everything else. And that exact observation led to what we now call the protein leverage hypothesis in humans. Think about it. If you're eating ultra-processed foods that are super low in protein, which are basically acting as protein decoys, like a giant bag of barbecue chips, your body instantly recognizes the deficit. When this happens, a specific hormone released from your liver called FGF21 kicks into gear. It literally forces you to keep seeking out savory foods, racking up excess calories until your biological protein needs are finally met. So your brain is leveraging your total calorie intake just to make sure you get enough protein to survive. All right, part 4, dietary energy density. Beyond just getting enough protein, the actual physical volume of food sitting in your stomach is a massive factor in how full you feel. When you eat, the physical bulk of the food stretches receptors in your stomach wall. Those stretch receptors then fire off signals straight up to your brain via the vagus nerve, basically saying, hey, we're getting full down here. This is where energy density is the real game changer. Energy density is just the amount of calories per gram of food. Fat is super energy dense, packing 9 calories per gram. Water, 0 calories. So foods that are rich in water and fiber, like fresh fruits and veggies, physically stretch out your stomach and flip that neurological fullness switch without dumping a ton of empty calories into your system.
So how do we systematically hack our biology to use this? Well, the research points to 3 really actionable steps to reduce your dietary energy density. First, cut down the fat content where you don't really need it, since fat is the most energy-dense thing you can eat. Second, crank up your intake of fruits and vegetables. They're packed with that volume-enhancing fiber we just talked about. And third, add water directly into your meals. A fantastic behavioral trick is to literally fill up first by starting a meal with something low energy dense and water-rich. Think a broth-based soup or a massive green salad before you even touch the main course.
And if you're wondering if this actually works in the real world, a 2017 study by Arguin and his team proves just how powerful this approach is. They put obese men on 2 different non-restrictive diets. One was a standard control diet, and the other was a highly satiating, low-energy-dense diet built on the exact principles we just covered. Now get this, the dropout rate for the standard diet was a massive 44.1%. Almost half the people just gave up. But the dropout rate for the satiating diet, only 8.6%. People could actually stick to the plan long-term. Why? Because they weren't white-knuckling their way through the day starving. They weren't fighting their biology. They were just genuinely full. Which perfectly sets up our final section, Part 5, Mastering Intuitive Eating. So now that we understand exactly how our bodies biologically regulate fullness, how do we make peace with foods psychologically? I absolutely love this quote from the Heart Foundation of New Zealand. Intuitive eating is a flexible philosophy that completely throws out the traditional diet mentality of severe restriction and obsessive calorie counting. Because let's be honest, we know extreme restriction almost always fails. But since we now know how to successfully satisfy our bodies with the right nutrients, we can finally jump off that toxic hamster wheel of losing weight only to gain it all back. We can shift our focus away from starving ourselves and instead focus entirely on nourishing our bodies and actually trusting our internal cues. The Heart Foundation lays out 4 core tenets to really embrace this intuitive lifestyle. First, discover the satisfaction factor by killing the distractions. Stop eating at your desk while you're stressing over emails or scarfing down food in the car. Give your brain a chance to actually register that you're eating. Second, actively feel your fullness. Actually take a conscious pass right in the middle of your meal to tune into those stomach stretch receptors we talked about. Third, make peace with forbidden foods. I know this sounds crazy, but if you allow yourself to eat what you genuinely crave without a side of intense guilt, it becomes way less appealing over time, and you naturally just eat a sensible amount. And finally, learn to cope with your emotions without using food as a crutch. If you're bored or anxious, go for a walk, blast some music, or call a friend instead of automatically reaching for a snack. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative question to chew on. Are you feeding your calories, or are you feeding your satiety? Because when you start prioritizing nutrient-dense, high-satiety foods over those highly engineered, ultra-processed traps and protein decoys, everything changes. You finally align your actions with your body's natural biology. You can step off that miserable restrictive dieting treadmill for good and actually enjoy what you eat while effortlessly maintaining your health. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I genuinely hope this completely changes how you look at your very next meal.